Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study, another Know Your Foe this week for the Philadelphia Eagles. Joining me, Zach Berman of The Athletic. Zach, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you coming on short notice, Zach. Let's get right to it and talk a little bit about the Eagles. One of the big things that just came out, the injury report, was
Mhm.
7 outs on it.
Yeah, so they have notable names missing. Alshon Jeffrey, we didn't expect him to play. Lane Johnson at right tackle, obviously one of the best right tackles in the league. It was trending in the direction that he wasn't going to play. Deshaun Jackson's really the one that jumps out to me. There had been optimism that Deshaun would be back. Uh, th- uh, I suppose this week it was certainly trending in that direction, but now he's missing his third consecutive game. Avonte Maddox out. He's a starting cornerback. Duke Riley was going to start at linebacker. He's out. The Eagles already had notable injuries, and then you look at the injuries for this game, they are really beat up.
All right. The Ravens also with a lot of players on their injury report, but Ravens fans know that, and they'll be able to look at it. Let's talk about the Eagles in general, where they are this year. Their biggest acquisitions this offseason for starters.
Yeah, so it was Darius Slay, and really they went into this offseason looking for that number one cornerback. That was a priority for them. They didn't get one in free agency. They were interested in Byron Jones, so then they immediately shifted toward trading for Darius Slay, and he's been as advertised for them. He's the best cornerback they've had in the Jim Schwartz era. Also on the defensive line, Javon Hargrave, the Eagles gave big money to him from the Steelers, and they already had a lot tied up in their defensive line. It's the way the Eagles are built from the line, and so they have three of the top 10 highest paid 4-3 defensive tackles in the league after signing Hargrave. They knew wide receiver was a priority for them, and but they were waiting for the draft for that. They spent their first round pick on Jalen Reagor. He's been injured since week 2 now, so he hasn't been in the lineup. But that was a major addition too, just because of the priority that they placed in that position.
All right. Javon Hargrave, of course, huge thorn in the Ravens side when he played for the Steelers. Definitely was somebody the Ravens, I think, might have considered to fix their defensive line problems this offseason. In terms of Wentz, so far this year, not the greatest start for him, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Carson's been inconsistent, and it was more the first few weeks. He's stabilized since then, but the interceptions have been a concern, and really he hasn't been a high interception quarterback during these past few years. The past 3 seasons he was at seven. He was at 7 interceptions each season. You're seeing him past that now. I mean he's turning the ball over at a much higher rate. He's also missing passes too, which he's never been like the most accurate quarterback, but that the misses he has are somewhat uncharacteristic. He's been playing with a beat up offensive line, a beat up wide receiving core. Those are factors, but they're not excuses here. There are just plays that Carson has missed. So it's not really one thing you can point to as far as why it's happening, but it is something that the Eagles need to improve.
This is very much a team that's built to win now, the Eagles. And if I look at the 2021 cap, they're about, what, 72 million over, I believe, last I checked. And that's on a base of 176 million. So this is the year for the Eagles. They have some decisions probably to make coming up to the trade deadline, whether they're sellers or they just wait and play it out.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know if I would necessarily phrase it in terms of they're built to win now. They were certainly built that way during the past 3 seasons. They saw that the window close, and really they had a lot of contracts to some of their core players that they have obligations on, and not all of them were good deals. But when you look at the age of some of their most expensive players, then certainly you can make that argument. What the Eagles would say is this is a team that was kind of transitioning their core pieces. But I do agree with you. When you go out and you acquire Darius Slay, he's not a young player. That's a win now move. And when you have a 27-year-old quarterback, you're not building for 3 years down the line. But the Eagles would argue that they let go of players like Malcolm Jenkins, players like Nigel Bradham, who had been core pieces for them. Also, their cap situation next season, uh, I think they think that it can be a little overstated because there are deals that can be moved around. In particular, Carson Wentz's deal, they can push money down the line there. But it is a team that is not. I would emphasize this: they're not getting enough contributions from their highest paid players, from their marquee players. And part of that's because of injury. Brandon Brooks was hurt during the summer. He's an all-pro caliber guard. But also, they gave big deals to Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, and those were misguided deals. And those are the deals that are really hurting them right now.
Right. All right. Well, of the current Eagles, who would be the most juicy trade target for another team
I
that
would say,
could?
yeah, I would say Zach Ertz, and I say that because he's 29 years old. He wants a new contract. The negotiations haven't necessarily gone well. They haven't gone well. There's no new deal, obviously, and the Eagles had Dallas Goedert in the building, and there's that succession plan there. Now they like playing 12 personnel, so they like the idea of having Goddard and Ertz, but are you going to pay for that? They've had Goddard on this rookie deal. He's eligible for an extension after the season. I would think that if the season craters for the Eagles, Ertz would be a potential trade candidate. That being said, the NFC East is awful. So
Mhm.
even if the Eagles lose to the Ravens and fall to 1-4-1, they're still in the thick of the NFC East race, especially when you see a Dak Prescott going down in Dallas. So I don't know if the Eagles would become sellers, but certainly it's a situation that you would need to monitor.
All right. Let's turn it over to the offense. I always like to start with the offensive line. I'm a big
Mhm.
offensive line guy, but take us through position by position because there have been a lot of changes there.
As far as who they'll have this weekend,
Yeah.
yeah, so Jordan Mailata will play left tackle for them, and he's their third option here at left tackle after Andre Dillard's injury and then Jason Peters' injury. But Mailata, I mean, if you like offensive line play, watch him because it's really like a big ball of clay that they've been building. I mean, 6'8", 345. They drafted him, a former, he's from Australia, had never played football before he came here, and he's been in the organization for 3 years, an offensive line coach. Jeff Stoutland's been developing him during that time. He'll be making his third start. Left guard, you'll see Nate Herbig, who's in his second year. Undrafted guy out of Stanford last year. He's been playing decently this year. Jason Kelsey at center. Everyone knows him, one of the best centers in the league. Still playing at a high level. Right guard, they have a change this week. They'll go with Jamon Brown. They've had Matt Pryor there. That was supposed to be Brandon Brooks' spot, obviously, and then they signed Jason Peters. They've had a handful of different faces in there. It's going to be Jamon Brown this weekend. He's a veteran journeyman.
He has
And
not yet played this year,
he
correct?
has he's not yet played, but Pryor has an illness that's keeping him out. And then a right tackle, they'll have Jack Driscoll, their 4th-round pick. And he's actually he's been a pleasant surprise for them, or I don't even know if I would say surprise, but he started week 1 and he's held his own, and he's a guy that they like.
One of the things we saw last week against Cincinnati was the Ravens take advantage of not only a young quarterback who didn't like to be moved off the spot, but a offensive line that's totally out of whack. No cohesion at all between them. I'm hearing what you're telling me about the Eagles and a lot of the replacements that have had to be made because of injury. Where do you think? Do you think they'll be able to hold it together given the level of coaching and whatnot for that offensive line?
It's a good question, and I'm going to give that offensive line the benefit of the doubt. There are a lot of areas on the Eagles roster where you can say that they're underperforming or guys aren't stepping up. I think the offensive line is a spot where I give credit to offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland. He's been here since 2013. He's doing a good job developing those guys, getting them ready to play, and they've answered the bell for the most part. Now, that being said, losing Lane Johnson might be one injury too many. You look at what the Eagles' projected offensive line was going into the year. Jason Kelsey's the only one left standing. So you essentially have 4 replacements, and that's hard to overcome. But the Eagles do have a good track record with replacement offensive linemen.
All right, very good. Wide receiver core. Now, obviously, a lot of injuries this week. Let's talk about who's actually playing.
Yeah, the wide receivers, that's a problem. Now, Travis Fulgham, who was on their practice squad earlier this season. They promoted him 2 weeks ago. He's come out of nowhere to essentially be the Eagles' top receiver here. Had 10 catches, 150 plus yards last week against the Steelers. And when I say come out of nowhere, that is apt. They could not have seen this coming. So he's emerged into their top receiver. And then after he's inexperienced too, but they're inexperienced across the board. They'll have Greg Ward in the slot. They have fifth-round pick John Hightower. Last year's second-round pick J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. He's underperformed. And then this year's sixth-round pick Quez Watkins. So it's certainly not a very accomplished group. It was meant to have Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, Jalen Reagor. So your top three guys are all out. And the emergence of Fulgham helps that a bit, but that's still a problem area.
Sounds like a good opportunity there too. I always like to see an opportunity for young development. You're going to have a chance for that in a week where obviously it's a trial by fire against the Ravens secondary. Running backs, and I always ask about the use of a fullback and about what percentage of the plays the Eagles do that.
Yeah, the Eagles don't have a fullback on their roster, and they won't use a fullback. There are times when it's I don't want to say two backs, but they'll have different people in the backfield. But usually that's either flexing it out or to try to get a matchup. And at running back, Miles Sanders is their 3-down back. They really haven't had a 3-down back here since they traded LaShawn McCoy, but that's Miles Sanders this year. And he's a good player. He had that 70-plus yard touchdown run against the Steelers last week. He can catch the ball. There's a lot to like about Miles Sanders. Beyond Sanders, Boston Scott, who had a very good finish to the season last year, and he was NFC Offensive Player of the Week 17 last year. He's had a slow start to the season, and he's their number 2 back. Corey Clement, who was a Super Bowl hero for the Eagles in 2017, had the most receiving yards in the Super Bowl that year. Hasn't really had a great career since then. He's the number 3 back. And then number 4 back, Jason Huntley, who was a 5th-round pick by the Lions this year. They waived him. The Eagles picked him up right before the season, and he hasn't really been active this year. Was active week 1, hasn't done much since then. But just given the injuries, I imagine he'll be active this week.
Okay, so mostly 11 personnel, 12 personnel would be second.
And well, mostly 12. Well, going into the season when everyone's healthy, mostly 12 personnel. This team's built to have 12 personnel. But with Dallas Goedert out of the lineup, and then you look, so they have Zach Ertz, and then they have Richard Rodgers now as their number 2 tight end. There's a fall off from Goedert to Rodgers. So they still play 12 personnel just because it's such a big part of their offense. But it's not used the same way that it would be if Goddard was on the field. So that's why you'll see more 11 personnel than when they're fully healthy.
Because we're AFC fans, who's the ideal inline blocking tight end? Is that Ertz or would it be Goddard normally?
It would be Goddard normally, but without Goddard and I would say Richard Rodgers, his strength's not blocking, so they don't really have that on the roster right now.
So it's really more like it's 11 personnel when they show 12. If I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm trying to match up against that. I'm likely to play a nickel or at worst a big nickel to try and stop it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, really, excuse me. If you're a defensive coordinator, you're probably going into the Eagles trying to take out Zach Ertz. I mean, he's their best receiving weapon. So there's been a variety of different coverages on him. I don't think teams treat the Eagles 12 the same way they would a traditional 12 because there are times when you have a corner over top Ertz. There are times when you have, you're often seeing a double or you're seeing a safety over top. So there's a lot of different combinations teams have tried against Ertz. So it's not really one uniform package that you see.
All right. Let's go over to the defensive side now. The first thing I'd like to know is what are their common base and pass defense looks? So an unsure, a 1st and 10, what are they most likely in? And then also on 3rd down, when it's 3rd and 6 plus, let's say, what are they most commonly in?
Yeah, I would say nickel, but the reason I'm hesitant there is because we haven't seen this team fully healthy. And when they're fully healthy, I think they would like to have a heavy dime on the field and use a 3rd safety often, because they like having versatility in the back end. They've They have some interesting options there, but they've just been so banged up. And the weakness of this team is their linebackers. So really, I mean, the fewer linebackers they can have on the field, the better. But really, I mean, you're going to see a 4-man front really throughout the game there, and behind them, it depends mostly what the other team's showing. You know, if you're, but they're a heavy man team. You know, I should emphasize that in the past they haven't really been a man team. This year, after acquiring Slay, they've gone in that direction, so that dictates it too.
All right, outstanding. One thing I like to talk about, and particularly with a 4-3 team, is the amount of rotation and snap management that's being done on that defensive line. So, what kind of percentage time do we expect from players like Fletcher Cox and the others there?
Yeah, they're gonna mix and match those defensive linemen throughout the game. So Fletcher Cox is a little different. You know, when he's healthy, he'll take a lot of snaps, but you're gonna see Malik Jackson and Javon Hargrave on the field 40, 50, 60% of the snaps as well. So they're gonna mix those guys up. You're not gonna have Cox on the field throughout the game. And then the same thing at defensive end. They're gonna play 4 or 5 defensive ends. You have Brandon Graham, Derek Barnett, Josh Sweat are the top 3. Then they have Jannard Avery's a guy they like. Vinny Curry, they can bring him off IR this week. I don't know if they're going to go in that direction, but there are a handful of different things they can do there at the end. And then I mentioned the top 3 D tackles. They also have Hassan Ridgeway, who they play as well. So they're going to have 8, 9, 10 defensive linemen on the field throughout the game.
Okay, so going back to that for a minute, I noticed they had 7 outs from 53, and you now dress, what, 48, including
Yes, he gets
alignment.
48.
So they have to have 2 elevations just to get to 48.
Yeah, they'll bring up guys from the practice squad this week, you know, as teams are doing, and I would say that you'll probably see a defensive back, so maybe Graylin Arnold there, and or you know, and they can go tight end, Jason Kroom, if they want, you know, a bigger body there. It's a tough predicament for them because they don't usually have this many guys out. I would say they would probably want a linebacker up there because they only have 4 healthy linebackers, but they don't really have a linebacker on the practice squad who I can see them promoting. So it's a tricky situation. I'm very curious to see what happens tomorrow.
All right, let's talk pass rush scheme and personnel. What do the Eagles usually bring? Do they bring a lot of just plain vanilla 4-0 kind of blitzes, or are they doing other things into pass rushes?
Yeah.
Or do they bring numbers or do they bring scheme?
No, they're not going to blitz very often. You know, their defense really relies upon getting to the quarterback with the 4-man rush, and they're going to be aggressive doing so. Now there are times when they've blitzed, and Jim Schwartz's blitz percentages have you know, they've gone up each of the past 4 seasons. But if he had his way, he's rushing 4 guys, and they're getting home with those 4 guys, and that's really a big reason why they have that rotation. You know, they want to keep guys fresh. So I don't think they'll blitz very often. They sometimes do it against a younger quarterback, obviously. Against Lamar Jackson, I'm not quite sure what they'll do because obviously he's a rare quarterback, you know. But I don't think this is going to be. It's. I'll put it this way: it's not like playing the Steelers.
Okay, a lot of twisting, a lot of stunting on the base 4.
Yeah, you see a decent amount of games there from them, but yeah, I would say you see a decent amount there. Yeah, and again, that varies game to game if they're trying to isolate someone against a certain matchup.
Okay, I think you took us through the defensive line already, but took us through the linebacking core. I'm interested if there are some platooning arrangements there that kind of make sense for this team.
They'd be fortunate if they could because they have personnel problems at lead linebacker. That's the easiest way for me to put it. I mean, Nate Gary's their top linebacker. Then they were supposed to have TJ Edwards. He's hurt. They're supposed to have Duke Riley. He's hurt. You're down to Alex Singleton. You're Sean Bradley, their 6th round pick, and then Davion Taylor, their 3rd round pick, who doesn't play. He was drafted as a project. But Nate Gary hasn't performed very well, and this is a team that does not invest in linebackers. They have the fewest amount of they have the least amount of money in that position in the NFL. If you're looking at off-ball linebackers, and if you're including players who opted out, you know, the Patriots are technically last right now, but they've had some big money linebackers opt out this year. I mean, just to put it in perspective, the Eagles are paying their long snapper more money than they're paying any of their linebackers. So, and I understand why they build it that way. Their money's tied up in their defensive line. They're paying their third defensive tackle more than most teams are paying their top defensive tackle. And they just think some positions you need to trust your scouting and your development, but they haven't done a very good job scouting that position. They haven't done a very good job developing that position.
I completely understand their position, by the way, in terms of not wanting to pay linebacker. I think of it a little bit like running back the same way. Take us through the secondary real quick.
Yeah, Darius Slay's their top corner, and he had a concussion, but got cleared, I believe, this morning. I'm expecting him out there to play as long as he doesn't have any symptoms these next few days. It's supposed to be Avonte Maddox on the opposite side. He's out again, third straight week. What I would expect them to do is Jalen Mills, who's been their safety but was their corner the past 4 years. I'd expect Jalen Mills to move over from safety and corner play on the outside. That obviously opens up a spot at safety. Rodney McLeod's one safety. The player I would really watch out for this week is Will Parks. Hasn't played for the Eagles yet this season. Still on IR technically. He started his practice. He started his practice window this week. I can see them activating him on Saturday, and I can see him starting, frankly, in that Jalen Mills spot. And then Kayvon Wallace, their fourth-round pick out of Clemson, would then be the third safety because Marcus Epps isn't playing. I should say Marcus Epps. He's injured. That's why he's not playing. And then their third corner will be Craig James. But this is a position that they're really undermanned too. So they're going to have to promote players there from practice squad. But they're a heavy man team. That's because of Slay. If Slay wasn't on the field this weekend, I would say I could see them doing something different, but that's obviously not the case. And so I would expect man, and really, you're trying to take advantage of the corner opposite Slay. Typically that is Maddox, but I think Jalen Mills has done decently during these past 2 weeks.
Spy on Jackson.
I would expect that to be the case, although it's hard to say who. I would say if everyone was healthy, they would play three safeties and they'd use one of their safeties as a spy. So maybe Will Parks, although I haven't yet seen Will Parks function in this defense outside of training camp. This week, I don't know which direction they'll go. I mean, in the past when they've had quarterbacks like this, they could go with Rodney McLeod, they can go with Malcolm Jenkins. But this defense, especially in the back end, is fundamentally different than it's been in the past. And they haven't played a quarterback with the athletic ability of Jackson. Now, obviously, I mean, there are very few people in football who have the athletic ability of Jackson, but just quarterbacks who play this style, the Eagles really haven't seen much of it this year. So I'm very curious to see, but I would imagine a spy on him.
Okay. Is there one player you think matches up well for the Eagles against the Ravens specifically, either offense or defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the Eagles have any chance of winning this game, it's with that defensive line, and I mean, obviously, the numbers better than me here, but that Ravens offensive line hasn't really held up in terms of protecting Lamar the way he was protected last year, and I think that's where the Eagles could have the edge. So I look at all three of their defensive tackles on the interior. That I say all the top three guys, they're going to be rotating in and out. And then those ends can get pressure too. I mean, the Eagles are built around that defensive line. So I think if they can hit Jackson, if they can cause havoc in the pocket, then that's really their edge this weekend.
Okay, I would agree. I think that the right A gap in particular very weak for the Ravens in terms of any kind of stunts or twists. Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate you doing this, Zach. I know your time is short, and we really want to respect that. Tell us where people can find your work.
Yeah, I really appreciate this. This was good discussion. You can go to theathletic.com. They have a great Ravens writer as well, and their Ravens coverage is outstanding. But you can check all our Eagles coverage too, and we'll have stories throughout the game, throughout the weekend, throughout the week.
All right. And go to filmstudybaltimore.com. You see the offensive line scoring for this week, all the defensive information that's out there, and a slew of podcasts. Please join us there. And thank you for joining us again. We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.